Welcome back to the Postscript, the podcast about films where the discourse ended with an ellipsis rather than a period. I'm Chris Hall.
I'm Sebastian.
And this is Mateo reporting in.
And on this podcast, we will be reassessing films of recent memory where the discourse was left unsettled. We will try to provide more definitive takes on films that generated a lot of buzz upon release, but their reputations have since become murky. Or maybe they've just fallen through the cracks altogether. Movies that make you ask, where are they now? Last week, we discussed the second film in the Pirates of the Caribbean franchise, Dead Man's Chest, where we, for the second week in a row, pretty collectively just gushed over the film of the week, and we determined that a lot of what may have rubbed people the wrong way about the film in the moment is, in retrospect, perhaps the greatest strengths of the film, and it's all paired with some of the best action set pieces of maybe the century. Before we set up this week's film, we must first set the table for this upcoming month on the pod, because for all of December, we will be covering all of the Star Wars feature films released in the post-Disney acquisition era. So that includes the entire sequel trilogy of episodes 7, 8, and 9, and the two anthology films, Rogue One and Solo. Because if we're talking about movies where the discourse is not settled, whose reputations are still up in the air, not solidified, where there's not a general consensus and expectations almost completely dominated the response to the films, and the discourse has been pulled into a million different directions, these are some of the ultimate iterations of the mission of this pod, right? And because to an even greater extent than like the Star Wars prequel films of the early 2000s, this most recent batch of Star Wars films helped usher in an unprecedented era of polarization within movie audiences and this specific fan base, right? Because this, frankly, historic polarization is most prevalent with the sequel trilogy, which we will cover in the second half of this month, but it still had ramifications on the reception of these spin-off films. And it's also worth noting that both of these anthology films, Rogue One and Solo, each had extremely troublesome productions in their own unique ways, which we will detail in full. So this week, we will be covering the first anthology film in the post-Disney acquisition Star Wars era, Rogue One, A Star Wars Story.
What will you do when they catch you? What will you do if they break you? If you continue to fight? What will you become?
This film follows Jyn Erso, daughter of the lead engineer of the Death Star, the Empire's greatest weapon, as she bands together with a group of rebels to steal the plans for said Death Star and give the Rebel Alliance a fighting chance at victory. This film takes place immediately before the first Star Wars film, Episode 4, A New Hope. The film was well received by critics, perhaps not as luminously received as Force Awakens was in the moment, but still greatly respected, especially on an aesthetic level. And it was considered a refreshing kind of change of pace and direction on what we've come to expect from Star Wars movies thematically, right? And it grossed a little over $1 billion. Very, very successful. Over time, though, especially after the sequel trilogy came to a close, I would say this has gained an even more favorable reputation within the Star Wars community. And it easily, I would say at this point in time, is the least controversial choice within that fan base as like the best Disney Star Wars film. You know, it's like if you're in a crowd of people, that's probably the safest pick, right? People love the way it complements A New Hope while still largely marching to the beat of its own drum, unaffected by other entries, you know? Because frankly, like as a result of this film, like not really containing any previously beloved characters and benefiting from having like no real expectation set for it, it's easily the least problematic from like a fan and like canonical perspective, you know, that people have like the least amount of beef with it in that sense. Though in reality, this was probably the most problematic of any Disney Star Wars film production, you know, because so the credited director of the film is none other than Gareth Edwards, the director of Godzilla 2014, which is one of the first films we covered on the pod. And he's also, aside from Ridley in the double feature, the first director double dip we've done on the pod. The first director with two films featured on the Postscript.
Congrats to Gareth.
Yeah, who would
Yeah.
have thought? Like, not Marty, not Spielberg, Gareth. Come on. In many ways, he's kind of like a match made in heaven for Star Wars, considering his proficiency, like in scale, and his ability to like properly wield like powerful pre-existing iconography. So principal photography for this film began in August 2015 and wrapped in February 2016. A few months later, began a 5-week period of extensive reshoots for this film. I mean, I think Disney even like they considered it like unreleasable in the way that it was. This is where Tony comes in, and the tale of two movies narrative begins. So Tony Gilroy, our dog, is one of the most respected living screenwriters and an absolute master of the craft. I mean, he was responsible for penning the Bourne trilogy, helming the 2007 masterpiece Michael Clayton.
Yeah,
Street
me and Chris will go to war for that movie any day of the week. we're on call.
Some of Michael's strongest soldiers. And he's also known for providing uncredited rewrites and punch-ups for countless scripts. Like, he's kind of like the GOAT script doctor at the moment, like of all living screenwriters. And when recounting the story of the production in the reshoots of Rogue One and how involved he was in the final product of the film, Tony himself, he said that he came in after the director's cut was finished, and that he was still granted a writing credit in arbitration, in his words, quote, with ease. Like the movie was done, and he's still listed in the credits as one of the writers on the film. So that kind of says how much he contributed to it. And then just this past May, when Gilroy was asked if like a new cut or perhaps like a director's cut of Rogue One could be released at some time in the future, he responded with, quote, no, that was the absolute best possible version you could have you could ever have. Oh my God, no.
Just worth noting also, Gareth Edwards, who kind of had the movie, maybe taken away from him a little bit.
Yeah.
When he did a Reddit AMA
yes,
pretty recently for the creator. And he was very diplomatic about it. Like, I think, he kind of avoided saying that like he regretted anything. And he sort of said like, this was the best possible version of the movie. And he was like proud of the work that he did on it. Yeah.
He was just like, I'm like spoiled and thankful I got to work on a Star Wars movie at all. Like all these things. Yeah, very, very good answer. But Gareth actually did say recently, it was like a radio show interview about the reshoots and all that. He said, quote, the stuff that's out there on the internet about what happened on that film, there's so much inaccuracy about the whole thing. Gilroy came in, he did a lot of great work for sure, no doubt about it. But we all worked together until the entire last minute of that movie. The very last thing we filmed in the pickup shoot was the Darth Vader corridor scene. Quote, I did all of that stuff. And then he goes, yeah, like the only thing I can say is that I was incredibly lucky. I got to make a Star Wars film. I won the lottery in that sense. And so he was trying to reaffirm that. He's like, no, like I was involved in those reshoots. But as you know, like Gilroy did a lot. Like Gilroy brought a lot to this film. All of this being said, while Rogue One was ultimately successful, there are many people who feel the effects of this production and that the movie is maybe a bit disjointed as a result, almost feeling like two different movies or two different visions in one. And while it's never been like, definitively revealed what exactly Tony doctored and added to this film, there's been lots of discourse about like what belongs to Gareth's original vision and what is a product of this like rejiggering. And again, we'll talk more about this later. But the biggest flaw some have with it is that, like some believe that Gareth's and Tony's visions kind of clash, and they ultimately meet at a midpoint of doing like a lot of things pretty well, but maybe nothing like spectacular, just kind of meeting each other in the middle. But not everyone feels that way. I mean, there are a lot of critics that I like respect that view this, like we've said before, like this, like the Gareth and the Tony of it all as more of like a feature rather than a bug, like as a kind of like best of both worlds, like dynamism, like in that what it brings to the table is still hugely admirable and very effective. And if there's anything people universally agree on, however, like it's the movie's visuals. And I mean, we talked about this ad nauseum on the Godzilla pod, but Gareth Edwards is like a true visual talent. And on this movie, he was paired with now Academy Award winning cinematographer Greg Fraser, who recently won for his work on Dune, shot The Batman last year, one of the greatest living DPs. So, okay, that being said, let's dive into just our like personal experiences with the film. Wherever you guys want to take it, what is your Rogue One experience? How is it in your mind?
I do want to say a little bit more about maybe us as movie fans,
Sure.
is that I do want to clarify to people. I think all three of us are like huge Star Wars fans, but I think me and Seb especially are like kind of like Star Wars scholars. Like,
I was gonna say not for like to get people to immediately click off this podcast, but like it's like a dark secret of ours that like we know like the alien species of Star Wars and like we know like a little too much.
yeah, like video games, books, like, so like we're not coming at this, I think, purely from a like, like detached or like movie watcher perspective. I think we're
It's biased for sure.
yeah, it's biased, right? Like, but like I also wanted to clarify to people, like, if you do end up disagreeing with us, we are coming at it from the perspective of fans. I think it's important to
Yeah, I mean, I think we have evolved. We have
yeah,
evolved into like I'd say like experienced movie watchers who watch more than just like Disney stuff and blockbusters. Like we obviously have like a extensive filmography of watches at least.
Yeah.
But at the same time, like Star Wars is probably one of those film franchises that we've probably watched the most.
Yeah, and like as documented on other pods, it's like we're not going to treat this film any differently in the sense of like we're gonna approach it like we are going to approach it from a very like filmmaking standpoint. It's just like, is this a good movie?
Right.
But we mentioned this, but like we have a lot of like experience, like a lot of time spent with the Star Wars IP, and so yeah, so we're not approaching it from the purely like again like fan first, like is like canonical mindset. No. But I think Mateo's saying this to address that, like it's not like we're not gonna act like we've been fans of the franchise our entire lives, But
Yeah,
again,
right.
it's like approaching from a filmmaking perspective is still our number one of just like
right.
for like the movie's sake. But I'm glad you mentioned that, Mateo.
Yeah.
But yeah, so I watched this movie in its theatrical run like probably like 2 or 3 times.
Yeah, same.
And then I watched it again, like probably 2 or 3 more times. Most recently, going to see it in IMAX with Chris and another friend of ours.
Soon to be guest. Soon to be guest.
I think mainly we went to go see it because we were really excited about Andor, and there was
there
an
was
extended preview. Yeah,
there was a 5-minute sneak peek for Andor, and we drove 2 hours to go to pretty much just go see that. Amazing. We'll do it
which
again. It was
worth. Yeah, absolutely
no
worth.
question.
But I remember that a lot of things about this movie were a very big deal, and things that, looking back on them, feel very stupid to like kind of emphasize. But
yeah,
like this was the first Star Wars movie, for example, that did not have like a title crawl.
Oh yeah,
and
yeah,
and like, and people made a huge deal about that. Like I
It
was
was a thing.
I was watching in the theaters. I'm like, whoa, this is different. Like, because like also like J.J. Abrams' first movie like kind of made a big point of adhering to the sort of like formal aesthetic kind of vision of the original trilogy. Like, and one of the things that people will point out, for example, is that the opening shot of Star Wars, you pan up, you like kind of tilt up and you see the ship, and the ship is like kind of like passing over the camera.
There's always a pan, either down, up, from the stars.
And it's like, and you're always like on the stars. And this one, it was like you saw this like kind of gray shape, but then it wasn't a ship, and it was like rings of a planet instead. And people were like really kind of like caught up in that. And it's like, it feels like so stupid now to think about, but like even those like tiny little breaks from the formula were like a huge deal. But I follow the production of this movie very closely, and I think I enjoyed it a lot when it came out. I was riding the high, but I think over time I've cooled a little bit on it, and I think part of that is the divisiveness of the two visions, like the and also just the fact that we had those teasers that felt to be a little bit more of Gareth's vision. I think that always felt like a disappointment to me that we didn't get to see some of those lines, some of those like concepts that were hinted at. And maybe they just weren't really there. Maybe the trailer was lying to us,
I mean,
But
there are shots. It's like we can dive more into this if we want, but it's like there are several frames, pretty good looking frames that like aren't in the film. It's like at one point in the first trailer, it's like Jin and Cassian are like on the beach, and then Jin's holding some kind of maybe the hard drive, some kind of MacGuffin, and they're like trying to like dodge these AT-ATs. They are not on the beach for that battle at all
Yeah.
in the Rogue One as we know it. So like that's like that alone is a pretty significant, again, readjusting of puzzle pieces, because it's like, yeah, they don't go there at all.
I mean, there's the shot of her trying to readjust the tower, and there's like a TIE fighter that flies up that's gonna like.
Yeah.
So I don't know. I think it is interesting how much this one they had shot so much, and there might have been, like the Gareth cut somewhere out there, but it is honestly kind of relieving to hear Gareth be like, no, like this is the movie that we wanted to make. Like there's not like a Snyder. Oh, just wait till I get my version out there. Like the one that like the studio didn't mess with. It's like, no, they
very humble about
pieced
it.
together something that they all found they were proud of. So that makes me feel more comfortable approaching this movie as a whole, as a movie.
Yeah, not a like what could have been kind of thing.
Exactly. So sorry, Matty, I didn't want to interrupt it. Right? Did you have more to say?
No, I agree. I think what I'm most excited for, maybe coming into this rewatch particularly, is two things. First of all, I have seen 2 more Gareth Edwards movies.
Yes.
Godzilla, which I was maybe less raving about than you two, but the creator as well. Shout out to the creator, which I did enjoy quite a bit. In spite of it maybe having like my least favorite screenplay of the year. It was like on a visual level so accomplished, and it made me appreciate Gareth's talents as a director so much. So that's like one side of that I'm coming at it from. I want to see this movie again in those eyes. And then the other thing is that Andor season 1 is like one of the single best seasons of television I've ever seen in my life. It is like it might be the best Star Wars product that has come out in the Disney era
since Empire.
Yeah.
I mean,
it's a little silly, like it's kind of cheating, but like getting a little bit of especially Cassian's like fleshed out character, like having that in my mind watching Rogue One again, I think is going to be interesting. And just like as somebody who is like in the past few years like really fallen in love with Tony Gilroy's dialogue and his talents with the pen, I want to see that and appreciate that as the work of these 2 artists that I really respect and appreciate.
Love that. Yeah. I actually I totally failed to realize that, is that like we are so much more emotionally invested in Cassian Andor than we were before our last viewing of Rogue One after that first season of Andor. And again, like if we're not careful, we'll spend an hour just gushing over Andor, because to people who haven't seen Andor, to like non-Star Wars fans who haven't seen Andor, it's like we can feel silly saying it, but like we cannot more genuinely and earnestly state that like it's not just like Star Wars good. Like Andor season 1 was one of the best seasons of television like of recent memory. Like it's just good because they gave one of the greatest living screenwriters full creative control. It's like it's that simple. It's so good.
We all saw it together too. The first few episodes of Andor.
Yeah. Us 3, because those first 3 episodes all dropped at once, and we all watched that together, and it's just like
intoxicating.
One of our favorite. It's one of the best Star Wars things ever. One of our favorite things of just probably ever. And yeah, and like again, it's like at the very least, like thankful this movie gave us that. Like I'm very very thankful for Rogue One for giving us Andor. Or at least just getting Tony in the mix. But Seb, how about you? What is your Rogue One experience?
Let's start from the beginning. Where I became a Star Wars fan when I was like 5 years old. And I was living in New York for 1 year with my mom, and I just met this one random kid like by the the Hastings River. And me and this kid just kind of bonded over Star Wars. Like he showed it to me as like a 5-year-old, and I just thought it was like the greatest thing ever.
Yeah.
And from there, it was just kind of a runaway train. Like I just I played all the games. I covered my eyes when Anakin burned alive in episode 3, like all
Oh
those,
yeah.
core memories that we have. It was there. And so, but there was a long time that like, the 6 movies, that's all we had. That's all, we were gonna get. And George Lucas had made it clear, like, yeah, like I had ideas for future movies, but like
Mhm.
it's not gonna happen. He would be like very clearly saying it. And so there was
Mhm.
some finality to that. There was some kind of like, all right, like I'm just gonna enjoy this perfect little 6 movie story. And I liked the prequels as a kid. Like that was
Yeah.
all part of the story. I was never like, I wasn't born in an era where there was like frustration with like the promise of prequels.
Yeah.
I just, they always existed for me. Well, except I knew I was around when, I was conscious when episode 3 came
Right.
out. But at the same time, so when the sequels, like when Disney bought it, and it was like, the promise of new movies basically was there. It was like as soon as they bought it, we knew we were getting new movies. Like
Mhm.
it
Mhm.
was like right off the bat, that was part of the announcement. And I can't exactly remember when a spin-off film was part of the announcement.
Mhm. Mhm.
But I do remember it was before episode 7 came out. That like
Yeah, it was definitely before then. It may yeah.
yeah. And so that was always interesting to me, that it's like, oh, like not only are we getting a new trilogy that's taking place like after Return of the Jedi, it's like we're getting like little stories in like different parts, different eras of like
Yeah.
the Star Wars mythos, Star Wars timeline.
A non-Skywalker saga film. Yeah.
I was gonna say, so Kathleen Kennedy is the producer of Lucasfilm,
Yeah,
or I guess
president of Lucasfilm, yeah.
president. This, it was kind of her ship. Like, I mean, like from the beginning,
Mhm.
her, and there's a lot of other people involved, but Kennedy was kind of the name attached to these new films. And so, whether they were going to be successful or failures, it was going to be on her shoulders. And it's not like she was new to this whole thing. She's been an accomplished person in the movie business for a long time. But at the same time, going into this, I think that they had a fantastic slate like in front of them. This was like around the time where it's like Marvel would put out like their slates of future movies, and Star Wars would be doing the same. And you'd be like, it'd be cool because you'd almost be
Mhm.
like ranking like, oh, like DC kind of has like the weakest slate in front of us,
Yeah.
but that Star Wars slate looks exciting. And like, look at the
Yeah.
directors attached to these things. Look at like what they're trying to tackle, and like how ambitious they are. I was like, wow, like Star Wars is like not only giving us like a new trilogy, but we're getting spin-off stories. Like Rogue One, like the idea of how you got the Death Star plans, what a great idea. Like that just in of
Yeah.
itself is a fantastic possible spin-off, because they used it from the opening crawl of A New Hope, where they talk about like, oh, the rebels just got away from,
Yeah.
stealing these planes. Like it was like their most
Yeah.
successful mission. And you're like, man, like what was that? And the fact that we were getting a movie to explore all these new characters, and like this vital piece of the Star Wars puzzle was so exciting to me, and just all the fans mostly. There was no one who was like, this is a stupid idea. I think everyone was like going into this movie going like, wow, like I'm like really interested in this.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
and the other draw was that we heard James Earl Jones is coming back as Darth Vader. That like there was like rumors like,
Oh,
is he
yeah.
going to be in this film? And then there's several teases of Vader, and it's like everyone would be like looking for like, oh, is that Vader? Oh, is that Vader? And then I think like the second trailer, they straight up show his helmet.
Yeah,
But
yeah,
like
yeah. Oh,
that,
that's right, yeah.
what happens with Vader, you mentioned the hallway scene, like that almost took over the entire movie's life for a little bit. Like that was the talk of the town, that scene. It was just the Vader movie now.
I mean, it's literally been copied now in 2 separate Disney Star Wars shows, which is
Yeah.
crazy.
It was that big. I mean, it like, so like that, I'd say that is like one of like the vital moments in this story of like
Yeah.
that we're going to be exploring. We're all leading towards that Vader moment. But as setting the stage, I could not be more excited going into that film. I mean, I was buzzing because this was after episode 7 came out in 2015.
Yeah.
I was in love with Force Awakens. So like going
Oh,
into
yeah.
Rogue One, I mean, Marvel was doing great, and Star Wars was doing great, and I was just high on life, like that's so. And then what happened going after, I don't know let's maybe throw it back to Chris because I've been talking for a little bit. Like,
Mhm.
I guess what we thought of the film after we first watched it.
Yeah, because I know for me it's on that first watch in that theater. I remember I remember the last act being absolutely just electrifying, and then and that Vader scene had 16-year-old me levitating in my seat. I mean, I was like
Yeah.
that was amazing, and I do want to spend a second on that because like some people kind of have soured on that scene with how much like fan service oriented stuff we've gotten since then. And like Mateo said, it's like we've gotten like imitations of that scene within the Star Wars universe since then. But I don't know, like to me, like the inclusion of that scene feels a lot more earnest than a lot of the baity stuff we've gotten since
Mm.
then, like in such a fan service era. And like it is like undeniably pretty iconic. Like Seb was saying, it's like superseded like so many other memories and aspects of the film. It's like that almost is the legacy in a lot of ways. Is Vader scene, Vader scene. I mean, it's a microcosm of Star Wars as a whole, but Vader was so much more of a novelty back then. You know,
Yeah.
it's like we had seen him in the original trilogy, and then briefly in Revenge of the Sith when he's just posted there, like he's just standing,
Yeah.
he just stands there and folds his arms, you know, or goes in his like Tempur-Pedic bed and like lays up, you know, in the after being created. And so, yes, seeing him, like we got to see Vader in a way we never have before. And I know like people older than us, people who like grew up with these movies are just like, I've waited my entire life for a scene like that. Like that is it's a
Yeah.
special thing. And I really don't want that to be taken away from anybody, you know, like I
No.
right. And yeah, I remember the movie ending and I remember my hands like trembling, texting my friends as I exited the theater because the movie felt so bold and just like I wasn't using these words back then, but like narratively liberated because I'm like, they killed
Mm.
everybody. They did that. Like
Yeah.
that's like things like that happen don't happen in Star Wars movies. You know, I mean, it's like the Family Guy joke when in like the Family Guy stars when Lois is like, are we gonna survive? And Peter's like, we have 4 of the 5 main characters in the Falcon right now. Like we're gonna be okay.
Yeah,
And
we're
so then
good.
seeing like my 6-year-old me like seeing a blockbuster just kill everybody like this, I'm like, I am like, holy smokes, like this just changed the world. Like this is like
Yeah.
cinema will never be the same. So since theaters, I've seen it twice since theaters. I watched it for my Rise of Skywalker rewatch back in 2019. And then yeah, once again for the Andor sneak peek in IMAX, right? When Mateo, soon to be guest, and I we drove 2 hours just for 5 minutes at Andor because we were standing Tony that hard. Like we were, and like again, it's like I mean, not to be pat ourselves on the back, guys, but guys, we've been on the Andor train since day one. I just want to say that. Like
we've been in this fight since we were 6 years old.
6 years old.
We watched Michael Clayton and we were like, wait, this guy's making Andor? And he was given a blank check. Okay, yeah, like why aren't we talking about this more? We knew. And my takeaway after that reviewing, so this was a year and a half ago, this was last August. My takeaway was that like while you can quibble over the narrative or maybe what could have been as much as you want, but for me, I was like, it's kind of hard to deny how much is being poured into this movie. And especially, again, we'll talk about this more, especially in like the Disney Plus era of Star Wars shows. Again, we talked about it last week. There is true spectacle in this film, you know, that
Yeah.
a lot of these shows have failed to provide, except for Andor. That a lot of shows have failed to provide, and a lot of other blockbusters are failing to provide. So I'm like, we gotta appreciate on that level, you know. And also, you know, again, it's like I feel like at this age, like year after year, I still feel like the way I'm watching movies is constantly changing in a way, and I would like to believe evolving, not devolving. And so I'm sure things, you know, I'm sure there will be things that stick out to me that haven't before, right? And like I said, like, it's definitely become like a pseudo hipster or like off the beaten path take to be like to say this is your favorite Disney Star Wars film because like, oh, like I like the anthology, like the not as hyped up one, you know, even though it's like I don't know if I agree with that take, but again, there's a lot I love about this movie, but yeah, but what were you like? What was your most recent viewing of this film?
Several years now.
Mhm.
And I was in a weird spot. I mean, similar to you, Chris, when I saw the Vader scene, I actually like, I think so I was 17 years old. I was like
Yeah.
convulsing in my seat about how hyped I was.
Yeah.
I mean, it's embarrassing to say that now, but I just like I can't lie. Like I was like freaking out. And so like leaving the theater, I was like, man, that was like the greatest thing ever. I can't believe I just saw. Like
No, yeah.
you know, the theater was going like crazy though. Like that was just like
Yes.
it, you know, Star Wars like had just that energy that Marvel did, where it's just like these moments you were
Mhm.
like seeping into your brain, you were never
Yeah.
gonna forget.
Like, where were you when this happened kind of thing. Yeah.
Exactly. And so when that happened, it changed my entire, viewing experience of the movie where I was like, I was really liking it to like, this is, goated territory. And
Yeah.
so, but then I got into like, once I started to talk to other people back at high school, like I think I was in my senior year, and I was talking to other people about like what they thought of the film, and they were all like saying like, this is so much better than Force Awakens.
Ugh.
Now this is like a tipping point for me and just like how I started to talk about movies. And because I
Mm.
was just like, why do all of these people think that Rogue One is better than Force Awakens? Because I was very protective over Force Awakens.
Oh, yeah.
I loved that film, or I loved that film. We'll see if I still do. And
The contrarian ground zero for like contrarianism in
yeah,
Star
and
Wars.
I
People,
was one. They were like, "Oh, it's just so much grittier and like darker, and has like it had better action and all these things." They were
Mhm.
like, "It was like Star Wars in the real world," and so briefly what you touched upon. But I was like asking, like, but like, what about the characters? And that was kind of my main talking point. I was just like, I remember all these things from all these characters in Force Awakens. They did such great world building with those characters in that first film that I was
Mhm.
just like, whoa, what is there to get excited about Andor? And
Uh,
then obviously now I couldn't have been more wrong, but back then I had a point.
but like yeah, like Riz Ahmed's. You're not getting
He's
fired
the
up
pilot.
for Riz Ahmed's pilot like you
He's
are.
the
Like,
pilot. Yeah,
but yeah,
you're
you know
not
what I
going to
mean.
bat for those guys. Like everyone's like, yo, the robot was funny. You're just like, okay, like
No, yeah, but
so
you're right. It's like they were simultaneously like maybe overly commending Rogue One for being quote unquote different, and at the same time, that's when people
yeah.
really maybe started to punish Force Awakens for.
That's exactly. They had this new Star Wars that they
Mhm.
really liked, and so all of a sudden there was a heel turn that they were like, "Oh, Force Awakens is just a copy of New Hope." That was
Which
when it was happening. I know exactly. Like that was the moment, and it
I feel
was
my blood boiling. That is yeah.
no, but like I felt like I felt my world crumbling in that moment. I was just like, why are we turning on like this movie just because we got like another good Star Wars movie? Like, what's wrong with y'all? Let's just
Yeah.
enjoy both of them.
Why can't two legends coexist? It's like
Yeah. So
Star Wars can be like Force Awakens, Star Wars can also be like Rogue One, but
exactly.
that was not a fun take apparently in 2016. Yeah.
No, it wasn't. Everything it was just like this competitive thing, and it just drove me nuts. And it changed everything, which is it was the perfect setup going into Last Jedi, which we'll talk about. But like
Mhm.
I I had entered a shift in how I like saw like movie discourse
Yeah.
basically.
Yeah.
And yeah, that's me.
That's crazy.
No, no, that's I'm
That's
really glad you brought up that. Yeah, that aspect of the discourse because again, the reason we wanted to talk about these movies like all next to each other in a month, and especially the way we're going to talk about all the sequels kind of in one episode. It's like it's because it's impossible to talk about one of these without talking about the others. It's like the way they were received
Exactly.
is so largely because of what came before them and what came after them, right? They're
Exactly.
so in conversation with each other, like these discourses, and so no, I want to talk a little bit more about the Gareth and the Tony of it all. Again,
Okay.
there'll be a longer conversation about this in the post game, but yeah, but something people liked so much about this movie is that it quote unquote didn't feel like a Star Wars property. You know, like
Right.
which it's like I mean, come on, like
Like what does
it's
that
like I
even matter?
guess right. And everyone's like, oh no, like this is a war movie, and it's like,
You're
all
like,
right, okay, yeah. I mean,
it's just
Gilroy.
because it had like Middle East kind of like visual imagery, and people were just like, "Oh, it's like we're in the trenches." You're like,
Right.
"Sure,
And that there wasn't a lightsaber for so long in the film and all those things,
yeah,
you know, and and that's the thing, and where it's like some people were like, oh, they just put Vader in that in at the end to make it more Star Wars, like to kind of pander to the fan base. But then I'm like, well, if that was the goal of the reshoots, it's like then why bring in Gilroy, who's historically like unsentimental about Star Wars? He's like his whole
yeah,
thing when he's just like, I don't care about Star Wars. Like he's like, I'm here to make a good film, a good TV show. Like I'm like he's like, I don't like fan service. Like and even he
yeah,
was like, it's not really a Star Wars movie to me. It's in his words like a Battle of Britain film for me, which I'm like, okay, for some
yeah."
reason when Tony says it, I'm like, okay. I'm like, even though I'm dunking on other people for being like, you think it's a war movie? That's just my cognitive dissonance there. But so these, especially after the creator, kind of like what we said, it's clear that in practically every Gareth Edwards property, unless it's Bryan Cranston saying the lines, there really is a direct correlation between like how much talking there is on screen and how much the movie is cooking. Like, right? Like he is. I mean, he's a spectacular visual storyteller, and that's the thing. The third act of Rogue One, which is the most folks the most undeniable aspect of the film, the most undeniable filmmaking, is largely purely visual storytelling.
Yeah.
But then at the same time, in a post-Andor world, we see what interests Tony most. Like he's very interested in the espionage, the idea of sacrifice or giving everything you have to a cause that you believe in. Like
Getting your hands dirty.
Getting your hands dirty. Like we said, like we can't say for a fact what were reshoots, but like that. Say more in the post game, but like that opening scene, the Andor's introduction in Rogue One is like uncut Tony. Like that is. I feel very comfortable saying that is Tony, like that.
Quintessential.
That is quintessential Gilroy right there. And so like if we were to grossly oversimplify it, we can probably say that Gareth is more interested in like the visceral aspects of war, while Tony is more interested in like the cerebral, like the philosophies that underwrite, something like a rebellion, and Gareth is more interested in just like, what is the cost? Like, how does this make you feel,
Yeah.
The other thing that I want to say, and we'll definitely talk about it more in the post game, is Forrest Whitaker. A character who, at least like the way that I think this movie was promoted at the beginning, felt like Forrest Whitaker would be this like huge component of the story.
Yeah.
And his character, who is interestingly a character that was first introduced in the Clone Wars cartoon as this like, kind of like radical leader who, kind of gets like pushed over the edge by the death of his sister in that show.
Yeah.
Like coming into Rogue One, like you sort of like, I think what they were kind of hinting at or pushing towards was like this character kind of losing his grip on reality a little bit and like becoming more extreme. And a lot of and like, for example, in the teaser, he does a lot of he has like some voiceover at the end, which is not in the movie.
Yeah. Or that shot of Jin turning around in the Dark Stormtrooper suit, which is a great shot, but not in the film.
Yeah, there definitely was like an idea of like kind of like maybe like a darker, more compromised like protagonist. And so I don't know, I want to see like whose were those ideas and like what was it that like got filtered through, because that was always like maybe my biggest disappointment with this movie. I just want to approach it also on its own terms as well, and not necessarily like say, well, it should have been this, and maybe just see what did we get in terms of that character.
To me, where I currently stand with the film, because I've kind of alluded to the fact that I've soured on some aspects of it, is that it feels like an almost movie where it's like it's on the cusp of greatness. Where there's some people who already give it the title of greatness, but for me, it was like that scene, Andor's introduction, or this idea that like the rebellion ain't as like clean and pristine as like we thought it was from the original trilogy. Or there's this idea like there's Mads Mikkelsen, who plays actually a pretty big role in this film as the father figure who created the Death Star to an extent. Like this tug and war, like should they kill him, should they use him? Like there's like I felt like they were almost there. They were like pushing for something that was really interesting, but they either didn't have the time or they didn't want to go too morally gray with it. And
things weren't explored as much maybe as you would have
as I would have liked. And I am curious going into the rewatch that maybe I'm being too harsh on the film. Like I like that is on the table. That like I've been like looking at it with like a bit of a a dirty eye because of like just all the nonsense and bickering online that there's been. Like it sours you on a lot of this stuff. It does.
No, absolutely. And that was another thing that maybe you kind of zagged people. Like people were like gushing over like, oh, like they made the rebels like morally gray. Like they love that new added. That was another new thing that Rogue One was bringing in it. Yeah, and adding ambiguity to the morals that hadn't really been like the franchise before, or like maybe like the Clone Wars, but definitely not in the films, right? it could be easy to pivot and be like, yeah, like I guess it does that, but like how far does it go with it, you know? And we've talked a
Right.
lot before of just like what a movie could have been versus what it is, and like yeah, and maybe we leave being like, it's like I guess it could have maybe done something further, but what there is still good, you know. It's
Yeah.
I definitely think it's important to like can appreciate and like again really like see what we have, you know, and like but
Right.
what you're saying is that is one thing. Chance, who was our guest on last week's pod, I remember him saying like his thing with the movie, he was like it's good, but for him like it doesn't go far enough in like any direction for him to be like yeah like this is it. But again, but not everybody feels that way, you know. It's like I think again a lot of people whose opinions I respect and like critics I like are like no like this is like still remarkable, you know. So
Yeah.
very interesting where we fall on that. Yeah.
I just don't want it to feel like a half measure, like they're dangling candy in front of you and they're like,
Yeah.
"Oh, that looks great, but you're not actually, tasting anything."
Mhm, mhm.
So I am curious about that, because I just remember
Yeah.
especially the first act of this film goes at like a billion miles per hour. That like you're just
Yeah.
bouncing from place to place
Mhm.
and it feels a bit weightless, which is not how you want Star Wars to feel. Like you want to live in these environments. It's like it's bread and butter. It's like, oh, you're on a new planet. Let's explore it. Like let's
Mhm.
like what's the topography of this place? What's like the civilization like? I don't know.
Yeah.
There's so much culture. There's so much. I don't know. The problem with Star Wars fans is that everything is a reference. Similar to Marvel, Marvel has gotten to this extent now that everything's a
Yeah.
reference.
Snakes eating the
And
tail. Yeah.
yeah, it's just like, and you want to, and I think we're at the point in our lives where the story matters more. Like we're just gonna like experience like these characters, what they're going through, and these emotional journeys, rather than like, oh, and I know this for a fact. There's the guys that get into a fight in the bar in episode 4 with Luke and
Ponda
Obi
Baba.
Wan.
Ponda
Yeah,
Baba, Dr. Emerson.
like people literally like it's like the boyfriend moment of like leaning over the girlfriend, like, oh, those are those guys that gets his arm cut off. Like,
Yeah.
you know, he's
Right.
gonna
And
say
that,
like,
that genuinely
I
is
don't
where some
like
people find value in like these films. Yeah. He doesn't
yeah,
like you either.
either. I'm
Uh,
sorry.
and when you were talking about that's like the movie's moving so fast. I just saw this. It was like David Sims like letterbox post of Rogue One when it first came out. He liked the movie, gave it like 4 stars out of 5. But and he was like the movie's messy, but he was like, but when was the last time like a Star Wars film was messy? Like he was kind of liking how
Mm.
this thing was like. He almost preferred it like overflowing with like ideas and new things. You know, he was like,
That's a
I
fair
like getting
point.
new stimuli, which again,
It's
it's
like
like
Dead Man's Chest for me. Yeah, it's like it's messy, but I was just like having a good time because it was
yeah,
taking a lot of swings.
no, yeah, it's much more interesting when something goes for it. Yeah,
I feel like I need to like briefly talk about like the Star Wars trailers and like how those were like cultural moments for us. Like everyone had to like pause what they were doing, like
no,
everywhere. It was
oh,
just like,
I would excuse myself from class until
dude,
like go
literally
watch the trailer in the bathroom.
Rise of Skywalker trailer comes out. I was in like a creative writing class. I was I literally just got up and walked out. Like I had checked my phone. I didn't even ask like to go to the bathroom or anything, because I was just like, I will figure out an excuse when I get back. I have to watch this. I'm gonna
No,
listen to the Emperor
seriously.
laugh at the end and be jumping up and down. Like, So, anyways, but like the Rogue One trailers, the teaser might still be my favorite one.
That
Like
first,
that.
that's the one with the Death Star, the woo, like that when that
Mhm.
one's going. Oh, again, like I haven't seen that in like 5 years, but like you know it, you don't forget it.
No,
Those
dude,
are really
it's
good
so
trailers.
good. I
My
mean,
favorite
Force
Rogue One
Awakens.
trailer is season 1 of Andor.
I mean, well, listen, like Star Wars, whoever does the trailers over at Lucasfilm, like
That's true.
they they know what they're doing. They could teach a master class on that.
No,
Like,
no, seriously. There is such an art to trailer making that like maybe almost isn't even talked about enough like that. And those
no,
Force
it's not.
Awakens trailers were awesome too, you know, and like yeah. And again, it's like Rogue One made $1 billion. Like those were good trailers. Like they definitely
No,
were.
they absolutely. And so the only one that maybe like that had mid trailers was Solo, maybe.
I was just
Like
thinking about that. I was like, I don't
I don't
The
remember
remember
best
any
Solo
the
marketing
best
trailer.
for
solo
that film.
trailer. The best solo trailer is the fan made one with the Star Wars Connect song. I mean that utterly seriously.
I'm dead. We got to talk about the scale thing though, like with Gareth, because like that
Oh,
was
sure.
a huge talking point, because in the trailers it was showing like the Death Star in
Mhm.
ways basically we had never seen. We were
Yeah.
just like, yo, like look at the scale of like that Star Destroyer next to a Death Star, like the Death Star, like it's
Gosh, he's
so
so good at
big.
that. And we'll like in the post watch, we'll definitely like we can dive into more examples of that and like how he used that well. But yeah, we talked about that a lot in the Godzilla pod. Yeah, Gareth's ability to communicate scale and to just like, yeah, and for those who haven't like heard the Godzilla pod, like scale, like if that's not like a term you're like super familiar with, or like what exactly does that mean in terms of like the movie? That's like, yeah, that's like being able to convey like the perspectives, proximities, or like physical size of like of your characters, like in relation to their environments and like in the spectacle they are surrounded by. So like a very simple way of saying it, like he's really good at making the Death Star feel like terrifyingly large and just like this overwhelming, just like this thing is going to destroy this planet. Yeah, he's good at conveying the severity of something. Yeah.
Well, it's what's so good about it is that like, the Death Star is like the culmination of like the Emperor's plan, basically, like of like a galactic takeover.
It's supposed to be like a world, yeah, like a world conquering weapon.
It's DEFCON red for everybody because it's like if you have a planet destroying weapon, it's Joe over.
That's wraps. Yeah.
Yeah. And that's what's so cool about it. It's like they're wrapping up building it. So it's like a time thing too, where honestly, a lot of the pieces they put together to make this work is actually brilliant. Like, and I know, and I don't even want to like spoil it. What they do as like a way to cover a plot hole in A New Hope is like, and we'll probably have a whole dissertation on what plot holes are later on in one of these episodes. But like,
yeah,
I can't wait to like talk because like that's so clever, like world building wise, and similar to like Prometheus and Covenant, like it's doing it in a really cool and interesting way, and not just for the sake of like, oh, here's Glup Shido. So
yeah,
like
remember this guy? No, yeah, it's additive, but then that's the thing. It's like people like Star Wars fans have, again, we'll talk, like this will be more of a conversation with the sequels, but Star Wars fans have gotten like so upset at the idea of like adding on to lore or like tweaking it in any way. And so like, yeah, it's always gonna rile people up when it's so like cherished and held on to for like decades and all that. And so maybe that's where people like Rogue One, because it does it in like the most like inoffensive way, the way it kind of complements or enhances the lore, But
yeah, my final thoughts on this before we go into the watch. I think this might upset some people hearing this, but Star Wars is inherently a revisionist franchise. It's begging itself to reinvent the wheel and constantly try and do different things or take a formula and break it. I mean, from the moment we went from A New Hope to Empire, and Empire said everything you thought you knew about this franchise, throw it out the window. Like we're doing something new. And in a lot of ways, Return of the Jedi does the same thing, where it's like, Leia is a sister, and like there's all these different twists to the story. The prequels breaking everybody's understanding of like what the Clone Wars was, all these little nuggets that they gave in the original trilogy, and people had get these preconceived notions of what a prequel series would look like. George does something completely different and is unapologetic for it, and that unapologeticness made people respect it later on. Like people revisited that.
Truly.
They reclaimed it later because they're like, hey, it was a vision. And then once again, obviously episode 7 was maybe not the most revisionist of the franchise. And then the movie became like they hated it for it. And then, there's a whole arc to this. But Rogue One is trying to do what Star Wars does, which is take what we thought we understood about, the story of Star Wars and give it a new spin. And so people were like, that will say that there is a way to do Star Wars. This is like this. There's a whole thing like it's a good Star Wars movie, but not a good movie, or we're like whatever, or vice versa. There's that whole mantra. But what I'm trying to say here is that like Disney tried at least at first to do what the legacy of Star Wars was. And I think that there is a lot of respect that should be, given for that. And then what happened is maybe one of the biggest tragedies in movie history, but I think that's just one of the more exciting things to explore later on.
No, yeah, I think everything you just said, it applies tenfold to The Last Jedi, and that's like, it's and there's all roads lead back there. And there's that Ryan Johnson quote, like he was like, what makes Star Wars special, yeah, is like what you were saying, its ability to like reinvent and grow and have the definition expand. And he was like, Star Wars isn't special if it's something you wheel out of a museum once a year and brush the dust off and be like, remember this? And then you put it back in. It's like Star Wars is the way it is now because of its ability to
You got to go stupid with it.
Yeah. And that's the thing the fans have Star Wars in like, again, we can probably dive in this more in the sequel conversation, in this catch-22 of like, we'll punish you for doing, even though I think it's over exaggerated what Force Awakens is doing, but punish you for doing quote unquote more of the same. But we're also going to punish you for trying to do something different, like in Last Jedi. And I guess there are some people that think Rogue One, I guess if there is a line to toe, does that well. Like, this feels fresh, but doesn't disrupt anything that we have come to know about Star Wars, But like, it's like we gotta calm down, fellas. It's like that's like guys, like relax. Like there's just a lot of gatekeeping going on in the Star Wars universe, and that again, it's Last Jedi was the greatest victim of.
Yeah. Star Wars fans might have the least amount of self-awareness of any fan base. That's for sure.
Yeah.
I say that as a reluctant member of the group.
People.
I can't. Yeah,
we are one of we're there too.
Yeah.
But Matteo, any last words before we dive into this rewatch?
All I can say is what will we do when the fans catch us? What will we do when they break us? What will we become? Take me back to Jeddah. Let's hop back on this train, guys.
Take me back to Jeddah. No, truly. That being said, everyone, we will see you all on the other side.
They've no idea we're coming.
Take hold of this moment. The force is strong.
Make 10 men feel like 100.
We'll take the next chance. And the next. You're rebels, aren't you?
Save the rebellion! Save the dream!
And we are back. Us three have actually escaped Scarif just before the Death Star explosion. That was actually a cut scene in Gareth's director's cut. It was three 20-something podcasters making off with Scarif as being blown up. Yeah. Fellas, let's just dive right into our kind of our general initial takeaways post this rewatch. We've all can rewatch this film, diving into a spoiler-filled deep dive conversation. Seb, let's start with you. How did Rogue One treat you this time around?
This was my favorite watch of Rogue One.
Wow. Let's go.
Well, it was close. So maybe my favorite was still the first, because I remember levitating after that one. But like, this is definitely like probably the second best then in that case, because and Andor amplified it. I will say, like, I just having watched that show, it does kind of like add some sauce to this movie. I'm not gonna lie, like there's some extra gravitas, and we're all kind of like rooting for our boy Tony. Like, watching this, you're just like you see some bits, and we'll talk about it, like where he injected himself into the script, and it's just, it puts a smile on your face. You're just like, oh, there's our master. He's at it again. I think maybe that's like one of my nice surprises this time around was like the script. Like, a good amount of it was working for me. Like, I was just like,
right,
they're getting the information across. Besides maybe some of the first act, but most of the time I wasn't confused. That first act can be a little rough, like editing wise.
This thing really moves. Yeah. It goes.
Yeah. It goes. And they have to introduce a lot of characters and a lot of like ideas very early on. But once you're in and you've gotten past the introductions, then it's just like, man, I'm just having a great time.
No.
Like,
Absolutely. I have one part where I'm like, I think the film like really finds its footing in this specific scene, and from that point on, it's just kind of nailing threes.
Yeah,
for me. I don't know,
That, for me, that emotional core. There is a scene like that's my "This Is Why We Play." Like, I'm taking the Darth Vader-ness out of this. Like, I think I wanted to give myself a "This Is Why We Play" that didn't include kind of like that kind of fan service. Not that the fan service is bad. Not that it's bad, because actually this is probably some of the best examples of Star Wars fan service. But my "This Is Why We Play" is more close to like what the rest of the film is kind of centered around.
Yeah. Specific to this movie.
Yeah, and I forgot how good that scene was, but like we'll talk about that later. But like,
Right.
there's just a lot of standouts here, a lot of great performances that I did not remember. Like maybe they're not even getting like the best lines ever, but they're like giving it life. Yeah, there's some people we didn't mention in the pregame.
No, yeah. Like what? I mean, the opening scene alone, I was like, oh wait, they're in this. I was like, they're like, yeah, you know.
That's exactly what I was thinking of. I was like,
whoa.
bro's kind of like the goat in this movie.
Yeah.
Wait, who's in this?
We'll talk about it.
The next Spider-Man, yeah.
I'm baffied right now, bro.
Oh, you'll see.
I'm freaking dead.
I guess I will.
And I mean, goes without saying, this film is gorgeous, stunning. Like it might be. Call me crazy. I'm about to say something crazy. This might be like the best looking movie we've done so far.
Oh,
on
of any Postscript film.
Of any of them. I might just go there.
I'd have to think about that, but I mean, yeah, it really
on
can't.
pure looks, like that's where I'm going. But like, yeah, I don't know. I am very happy. Now the end with like the Princess Leia bit kind of left a sour thing in my mouth.
I wanted to ask you guys about that later. Yeah, we will get to that.
I made sure when I put in like my final review, I was like, just like take that out for a second. Like,
yeah,
you know, like, just how did you feel about the whole movie? And not
remember
about, like,
the previous 2 hours and 5 minutes before.
Exactly.
Before
Exactly.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, all right, that's it.
No, love that. Mateo, how about you?
Rogue One, a Star Wars story. Directed by Gareth Edwards. I want to like preface this by saying this is actually a decent movie. This is not a bad movie. I like this movie quite a bit.
Okay.
If I had a Postscript ranking, which I do, it would definitely lands somewhere in the middle. It's nowhere near the bottom of my ranking. Cool. So I do.
That's good to know.
However, the fact that this movie was like kind of, like substantially reshot and remade is like apparent over like the entirety of the first and second acts, to the point that structurally I think this movie is like substantially flawed. And I think it really recovers a lot of the momentum that it loses towards that third act. But where I would say that, to compare it to last week's episode where we talked a lot about how kind of there was a very huge conflict of visions between, Elliot and Rossio writing Dead Man's Chest and Gore Verbinski directing Dead Man's Chest.
Yeah.
Somehow the directorness of it all, the goreness of it all, kind of like cohered together this like really like well put together film that does not show very many seams.
It was able to synthesize really well.
Yeah. And this feels patched together. And and so that's kind of where I stand on it. Like, I think, and I think part of this boils down to what I see as one of Gareth Edwards' flaws as a director, which is I think that I don't think he's very good at maybe like perceiving like moral uncertainty or like gray areas about like characters and situations. And I think in that sense, he might be like almost like so totally unsuited to Tony Gilroy coming in and rewriting his whole movie, because Tony Gilroy thrives on that.
Yeah.
And we'll get into it more, but like something I thought about watching The Creator is a movie where there are good guys and there are bad guys. And any time that you think that the good guys might have done something wrong, which makes a character kind of feel ambiguous about them, it turns out that we were just lied to. And the good guys are always never do anything wrong. They're always good. And bad guys are always bad.
Yeah.
And so I definitely see that in kind of how Gareth Edwards like took this material. And yet Tony Gilroy is like he's so married to the idea that the good guys have done bad things and it's affected them as people.
Yeah.
And so I think ultimately like making those two visions work is almost like an impossible ask. And I think that's where the movie fell short for me. But on the most like superficial level possible, which is like just like visuals and action, this movie, especially that third act, is a slam dunk.
I know. I want to put words in your mouth. I don't want to call visuals superficial though. Like there is like, and I know you know this, but like, I mean, there's a lot of
I agree.
storytelling and emotion that can be done. Sans
Right?
the
No,
script and
that's
via
yeah.
visuals.
But
Okay,
like,
yeah,
what I mean is more that
it's just pretty.
To me, this is like a very beautiful movie, but sometimes, it just feels hard to stay. It just feels hard to stay compelled visually because I'm not getting much of a thematic sense from
Interesting.
from it sometimes, and we'll get into that more. But
In response to you, there were moments where I'm like, oh, this does feel like a scene that Tony reworked, and we can get to that. But I do think it's smoother than you're giving it credit for. Like, I don't think it's as rough around the edges as maybe it was like to me as it was to you, or it seems to Seb as well. And I will say, like, because like you were saying, like the moral gray areas, right? That Tony loves to thrive in. This was a fun film to come after Dead Man's Chest because there were some similarities and some parallels between these two films. That I was like, that was kind of serendipitous. But one thing I really liked about this movie is something we complimented Dead Man's Chest for was like, like having conflict between like the main characters because in Force Awakens, it's like everyone kind of gets along, which is not a dig, but like it's like they're in it together. But like for a while in this movie, it's like there's a lot of tension and conflict between our main protagonists, right? And I couldn't help but wonder if that conflict like was largely from Tony, like if those it's like those subplots of like Cassian being like tasked to kill Jin's dad. I was like, that kind of feels Tony-esque. I don't know. I kind of
good stuff, man.
It's good stuff. No, it's like and
honestly, that very well could have been because the scenes where the rebel like commander gives him that order, General Draven,
yes,
gives him the order. He's like he takes him off to the side, and a lot of it is 80 yard. Very easily could have been done.
I mean, you're another instance of Mateo having access to my Google Doc. No, yeah, that I wrote that down. I was like, the camera's on Andor, and the general, his mouth is not moving the way of like he's not saying the words he's mouthing. I'll tell you that much. I was like, they could have easily changed this side quest. Like that's a very and so so that's where I was like, oh, that might have been a Tony edition. But that's the thing. I like that addition. I like that dynamic.
It's a small thing. Like,
yeah. And so it's like the fact that I can see that seam doesn't mean I'm knocking against it because I'm like, I like that change. It's like I like what that added. And it's very, very minor, That being said, my in terms of my general thoughts after this rewatch, my biggest takeaway was that, and again, we've already litigated how much of this film is like Tony's DNA versus Gareth's, but I want to say that there are very few directors who can wield pre-existing like epical iconography with so much reverence while also exploring and displaying new shades of them and shooting them in new ways, quite like Gareth Edwards. Like he is, I think he's a pretty singular talent in that way. Like it was specifically when Andor, Jyn, and K2SO are scouting Jeddah on the outskirts of the city, and you see the Star Destroyer looming over the entire city with the TIE fighters swarming and circling it like it's a wasp's nest. And like in that one shot, like so much information is conveyed about like the state and like the kind of hostility like of that city. And it's amazing. Like I've seen, like he didn't reinvent like the designs of those ships or anything. We've seen those like the TIE fighters and destroyers a million times, but I've never seen them quite like this, Like I've never seen them like quite staged in that way. And so I had a newfound appreciation for stuff like that. And again, we'll get into this. We'll have a whole section where we'll really dive into like what was Gareth, what was Tony. And in a perfect world, Gilroy was the writer on this thing from the get-go. Like from day one of pre-production, he was on board. He didn't come in after the fact. Like the PEMDAS isn't quite where we wanted it to be on this thing, right? But and Gareth still directs in that case. But honestly, like I was thinking, like if Gilroy writes this thing from the beginning and Gilroy actually directs it too, I mean, there's a good chance that movie is better in many ways. But in this scenario, in that scenario I'm proposing, there would be so much imagery and a lot of visual textures that we would have never gotten with anyone other than Edwards,
Yeah.
And
I don't know
so,
if we get the third act without him.
No, yeah, it's like, and again, and Andor proved to us that like Gilroy can write some awesome set pieces. Like, I'm not like, oh, the action wouldn't have been as good. Not what I'm saying, but like, there's stuff that I think like really only Gareth can provide, and
It
like,
would have definitely been different.
Yeah, and so like I'll take some bumps. Just like, so watching this film, like I don't know, I felt more just grateful that like we allowed Gareth Edwards to like grace this universe with his like his visual sensibilities, and like in a film that also had the privilege of being bolstered by Gilroy. Like I know that's a very glass half full way to look at it, but I think that's maybe what, in response to what you're saying, Mateo, how you're like, yeah, like I was talking about people who were like, oh, like I think it's cool that we have Gareth DNA and Gilroy, even though those do clash for you. That's the kind of like, again, more optimistic way that I view it through. I'm like, I'm very, very glad we had Gareth's take on Star Wars, but I'm also extremely thankful that like we got that with Gilroy's punch ups, because like I mean, like Red Dead 2 Arthur, like I'm afraid meme of like what this movie looked like before Gilroy. Like I know it still would have had a lot of Gareth visual sauce, but like after watching The Creator, I was like, I enjoyed that, but it really would have benefited from some Gilroy like just kind of punch ups, you know. And so like, I am glad Tony came in, even if it means it's like it feels a little rejiggered in some ways. I'm like, I still think that, like, again, it's like the Gilroy quote. He was like, no, like this was the best version of this film. Like he was like, believe me. Like some people were like, oh, release the Gareth cut, but like, no, I
don't do it.
I would be shocked if the Gareth cut was
the Gareth cut probably has like at least like 5 more minutes of Bo Gallet.
Yeah.
And I'm not gonna lie. You're watching Bo Gallet, and I'm like, what the hell am I looking at? Like, get that off the screen now. And it's Bo Gallet. I'm not even talking about like, oh, it's ugly or it's weird. It's just like a subplot that obviously sucks. And they're trying so hard to get rid of as much of it as they can.
Genuinely, it's like, yeah, probably one of the worst like Star Wars creatures that's graced the screen.
But it's also like pointless. Like there's like this whole thing about there's all
like
this Saw Gerrera
stuff. Yeah.
And clearly like that might have been the stuff that like had people executive like scratching their head like, what am I looking at? Because like
seriously.
Saw is constantly inhaling this gas. Never explain what that is.
No, you don't have to do that. That's just a thing.
Like that's almost like a Tony thing. Just color for color.
I think but I think there's clearly like something about how it's affecting his mental state that was
it's more about just how he's a broken guy.
No, but I think there was more. I think there was definitely more to that. I
think they read into it a little bit more.
And I think there's more. I think there was more to Bo Gallet and like
I'm not debating.
Like he makes you go insane. That. Like clearly it felt to me like there were a lot of abandoned Saw Gerrera plot threads.
Oh, that for sure. I am curious though, Mateo. Without Bo Gallet, we're not gonna get the most iconic line delivery of "Are you the pilot? I'm the pilot. I'm the pilot. I'm the pilot." It doesn't happen. It doesn't happen without Bo Gallet. That's what I'm saying.
That is true. And you know what I'll say? So I many times in discussions of Rogue One, I have ragged on this movie for providing zero characterization to Bodhi Rook, played by Riz Ahmed, other than he is the pilot. In fact, he's referred to, he calls himself the pilot probably more than he calls himself by his real name.
Or has lines in general.
Yeah. I think he spends more time.
He had more than I remembered. I'll say he had more than I remember going into this.
I know.
But yeah, you're right. But all of the color and texture to that character is from Riz, though. Is the thing. Like,
yeah. And you know what?
That's what I meant, though. Yeah.
Yeah.
Here's what I'll say. This time around, I think I had a good bit of fun with him saying that he's the pilot over and over.
That's what he's saying.
It was kind of charming. And I don't know if that's just like me, like kind of like
He's endearing.
It being beaten into my head and watching the movie like so many times over the years.
He's the pilot. Yeah,
He's the pilot.
I need that. I need that character poster. I'm gonna see if that exists. Keep talking. Yeah,
there has to be
like,
one.
Just like, yeah, I don't know. Something about him saying he's the pilot kind of struck a chord for me this time.
It hits by the end.
Even though that character is kind of
Bro, he does the title
terrible.
drop. He was given the title drop.
He does
that's
say
true.
he does
have the title drop, and that's so fun. I don't know.
That's a
I ate
fun
that
one.
up.
I think my favorite one. Well,
maybe
no,
this gets cut. I'm sending Seven Mateo the Bodhi Rook character poster right now. I'll this is I'm so I lost. I don't even know if my mic picked it up. I hollered. Why is this?
Whoa!
New lock screen just dropped. I know this is a purely auditory format. I'll post.
No, so he's got because he's got his lab goggles on.
Oh,
but
yeah.
then the light from the hologram of the Death Star planes is reflected, like bouncing off of his face.
Oh yeah,
like
Genuinely
the
a
projector
great
in school.
poster.
I mean, like they did not have to go this hard for the poster of like
Bodhi Rook,
the least cool member of the Rogue One crew.
It's like they were aware he was the least cool because he went out the most dirty by far. Like some guy just throws a grenade in there and he just
bro is in
eats
freaking the like yoga like downward dog position, just like
dude, like he's on his knees.
like he kind of has a Tom and Jerry like and just like
that's the thing.
Just them up.
It's
Although
a
I will
brave
say,
moment.
I remember even from the first watch, that was the death that like maybe got me most emotional because he's so sweet and like endearing up. Okay, I shouldn't say maybe most emotional. Maybe that was the one maybe like I don't know. That was the most like
jolting, maybe.
Yeah. That it probably was the most jolt because is he the first?
Yeah,
no.
Is he the first? I can't tell if it was the first, but is he the first human of the Rogue One deaths? Oh, that's probably why, because it's just like, they just blew, like, unceremoniously just blew him up. And I was like,
because like the droid in Star Wars, when the droid in Star Wars gets destroyed, you're like, but they'll fix him.
Yeah. That is the way they pace out those. Okay, we'll talk about the third act like in totality later. But the way they pace out those deaths and give everyone a moment is nice. But no, Mateo, you're right. Like the first act definitely has the most like they were moving the puzzle pieces around on the board like a bit. Like, but again, it wasn't like it didn't really take me out of it though. Like it wasn't glaring for me. But like I can see where you're coming from in that sense. And
Bodhi's scenes, I literally typed this in my notes. It looks like they just spliced them into the movie, like wherever. There was like no pacing reason to jump to a Bodhi scene in any like on any of his scenes. Like, and all of a sudden we just be with Bodhi, and you're just like, bro, like why do we keep going back to this guy?
And we can dive more into the characters and stuff in a sec. But like in the same way, it's like we have no. Like, we don't know what Jin's life looks like outside of, like, again, the childhood with her dad and, like, and now. They're like, you're a criminal. I'm like, I'm taking your word, Haas. Like, I'm like, I don't know. Like, we see, like, they definitely they trimmed all the quote-unquote fat they could with, like, Jin backstory. Yeah. Like, I feel like that's definitely, like, minimized as much as possible.
In the trailer, when they're, there's that scene where they're listing off all of her crimes to her.
Yeah,
she says, this is a rebellion. I rebel.
Yeah,
that line not in the movie.
Not in the movie.
She's
probably
like
for the best. Not gonna lie, kind of a corny line.
but clearly they like. I think they might have envisioned that like Jin as a more ideological character.
Yeah,
I think it works.
They slashed. Yeah,
it helps her character arc, in my opinion.
No, I do too. Making her more apathetic towards the cause, I actually think is a good choice because it's like the first time in a Star Wars movie where it's like our main character, like to begin with, like, I mean, it's like we know she will end up caring, but like start like she doesn't give a freak about the rebellion.
Kind of starting out with like beginning of episode 4 Han Solo a bit, like a guy who's just like doesn't really care what side he's helping. Like I love the line. She's like, doesn't matter if you don't look up.
Oh, that's like, I have that written as one of my Gilroy lines later.
That's Tony wrote that.
That's
Tony wrote that.
Pure Tony.
But yeah, key to her character. Like,
I was gonna say like they definitely pivoted her to more apathetic, like a lack of ideals more than anything, you know. Which again, have that being like your entry point as the viewer, and like I do think that's interesting. I thought it helps with the journey. But I will say the moment, like, because it seems like the sauce stuff was bumpies for you, Mateo. I will say I do think it is the test sequence on Jeddah. I think that is where the movie finds its footing, because it's like, and that almost feels like it starts to synthesize the Gareth and the Tony, because I love that conversation between Saw and Jane King. We'll talk about this more later, because I love that line. Like, it's not a problem if you don't look up. And you have like Galen's monologue going, talking about how we deceive the Empire, how monstrous and arrogant they are, as it like cuts back to great cross-cutting, cuts to Krennic and everyone else like initiating the test, like in awe, and the Krennic's like, oh, it's beautiful line. While like and you see the destruction from all the different perspectives, which Gareth is great at, showing different angles of one big event going on. Yes, Eb?
We're kind of going over my "This Is Why We Play"
Oh,
right now.
Hey, we can. We'll circle back. I'll say
Okay.
that scene is where the movie finds footing to me, and it's like very smooth sailing. Like, and really, I think it really starts to soar for me from that point, like going on, and each act is better than the last. But that's just kind of my last 2 cents on the rough edges of reshoots kind of thing, you know.
Also, when the gang's all together, you know.
Yeah, and you do kind of get you assemble the team as quickly as you can. And and I do want to talk about just like the cast and the characters now, because I honestly, like, 'cause I've seen some people maybe think like, oh, maybe they wish they spent more time with these characters, but honestly, I think it's like, and again, I don't want to give like all the credit to Tony. I feel like this maybe what Gilroy was brought in on. I feel like it's pretty economic character writing, because when you meet all of these people, like, maybe besides Bodhi, they all feel very realized. They feel very realized, like, already, and they're well acted, like we were saying. And like, for instance, like after just a couple lines from like Chirrut and Baze, like you get their deal, and their dynamic feels like one. It's like these people have known each other forever, and like you already get their dynamic, you know.
I mean, those characters feel like Gareth characters too. That might be those characters felt like that's like Gareth at his best. I feel like those archetypes are like classic. They're reliable, and you get like 2 just like really good like actors just to kind of ground them, and like, you know, they're people with like a huge pedigree in China, like established, like just kicking ass, and and you know, I don't know if they've appeared in films together before, but like they like definitely had some like pre-existing chemistry that they were able to like work through.
And that helps them, because I mean, you do get pretty immediately attached to them, and like, and again, the fact that I did kind of feel something when each of them died, I'm like, I mean, that isn't a comedy. Like, they set up a lot of these people, and I'm still like, I mean, I am invested when all of them ultimately.
Not gonna lie, it took me like 4 rewatches before I knew Baze's name. I don't know. I'm even sure like if they say it in the movie more than like once.
I think the only time maybe someone says it when he goes, Baze Malbus was one of the most devoted, guardians of us all.
His line delivery is great.
Those line readings are wild.
He might have been my MVP from this rewatch, dude. He had like way more to do in this film than I expected.
He's awesome.
So,
no, I mean, Donnie Yen King, And again, like I said, I love like some of the conflict, like especially the Andor Jin conflict. And one thing, this is in a Sean Fennessy's piece for Rogue One back in 2016 for The Ringer. One thing in describing this film, he said it's, quote, massive in scale yet quietly motivated. And I really like that in reference to just how the characters fit into the plot. You know, it's again, it's a huge, like, literally like the biggest stakes possible. But I like that we're with these people. You know, like, and I like the way that. I like the way they're characterized, even though, it's not like a super character-driven film. Like, it's not like we're not diving into their psyches very much. I mean, aside from like maybe some cool Andor moments, but again, that is bolstered by the season. But like, but that being said, we were talking about this a little bit off mic, but like from the opening scene, I was like, oh, Max is in this. I love how I forgot he was in it, but like, the first thing I wrote was just like, I like that they. Because Mads Mikkelsen is an actor that is so often used so unimaginatively, most recently and annoyingly used in Dial of Destiny as just like another, again, just like European villain.
Or
like,
Doctor Strange villain.
He's he's used pretty boringly in these movies. And so I like that they gave him something different to do in this, and he's good. I don't know, you know.
I mean, okay, yeah, you know, Mads Mikkelsen, like it's interesting, like, and people have talked about it. He's talked about it in interviews. Like, he is used very differently in Europe and in his home country of Denmark. Like, he normally just kind of plays like regular, like, leading man characters. Like, and sometimes they'll have like trauma or violence or like something else affecting them. But like, especially like the last like probably like 10 years of his career, like he's just like a leading man. And so like giving him like something like that to do in an American movie, it's like, yeah, of course he can do this. Like, he's an extremely good actor. Like,
yeah,
and like
very comfortable.
Yeah, it just makes you wish that he would be used in Hollywood productions like that more often. Also, I want to highlight maybe my favorite performance of the movie, which is Ben Mendelsohn.
It's time for the Ben Mendelsohn piece. We talked about him a little bit before this. I mean, I can't believe we didn't mention him in the pregame. I that was disrespectful of us. Yeah.
We go to the intro. We already talked about the intro. Like, he's kind of like, he's arrogant. He's a little like full of himself. He's so sure that he's gonna pick up the whole family. Like, and that moment where he tells Galen, like, oh, you're a brilliant scientist, but you're a terrible liar. And then you see Lyra show up, and he goes, oh, here's Lyra back from the dead. It's a miracle. Like, I mean, he's just like,
he's a gobbler. He's a gobbler.
It's peak,
he's
dude.
lapping up every line.
And not just that, but like when like the moment where like Galen like lies about Lyra passing away, and he's like immediately goes like, oh, my condolences. Search the house.
Yeah.
He's so much fun in this movie.
He's eating up the screen, dude.
Yeah, no, he's great. And what's even better about him is how his interactions with like people that he wields power over are so different from the people who are in charge of him.
Yeah.
Yes.
And like that dichotomy is great, because then like when he's with Tarkin, who he kind of sees Tarkin as a rival, but Tarkin is also his boss, right?
Yeah.
Like there's like there's a lot more like frustration and
there's a supervisor
kind
aspect,
of poutiness and deference. And then it's just like the complete end of the spectrum with Darth Vader in my favorite volcano reshoot island.
Oh, dude.
Incredible.
I literally put in like the volcano scene where it's like the doors opening and you see the silhouette, like, and it's like completely like dominating like the frame where like Ben is like so tiny in there.
Yeah,
might be like one of like the best shots of Greg's life. Like
that's a very.
It's definitely it's one of the best shots in this movie for sure. Like
and that is like, I know that might be a quick side tangent, that there is such a stigmatism around the word reshoots, because it sounds like, I guess in this case there kind of was, it implies mistake, or like we messed up first time around, but like so that's why now they call it like additional photography, right? But like, I mean, anyone will tell you, I mean, Bill Hader is like, because he has so many pods of him talking about Barry, so often talks about how it's just like reshoots are not your enemy. It's like those are like sometimes the best stuff comes from reshoots. Where like, I just want to emphasize, like, it's cool that one of the best shots in the movie came from a reshoot, because it's not like reshoots aren't just like band-aids. It's like, I hope no one notices. It's like you can still cook in there. It's like you get all materials,
for sure.
Like, let's add on to it with this. Like, it's not like all your ideas are up after your first bout of shooting, you know?
Yeah.
So I just wanted to debunk some of those.
It's just cool. It's cool. Yeah, it is cool that in a reshoot they were just like, yeah, let's just create a new location. Also, it's Mustafar. Also, Darth Vader has a castle there now. Like,
yeah.
I mean, yeah,
you can be opportunistic, and it can be so additive in a reshoot.
Yeah, just a great piece of I mean, great piece of little, like, that's definitely like a little lore gummy, a little lore or morsel for the fans.
I like lore gummy. Yeah.
But it's also just good. It's good. It's good visuals. It's good.
Yeah.
It's good pulp.
Yeah, good pulse, good word. I want to spend just one more second on Mendelsohn because one of the first things I wrote was just rare Ben Mendelsohn W, which I don't mean that in like an acting quality sense. I mean, bro has been in some cheeks projects since this
Oh, I was
film.
gonna
His
say.
filmography, like holy cow! But the thing is, it's such an interesting career in filmography because he went from like being like kind of like memorable, like when you see him journeyman character actor to then he wins an Emmy in 2015 for the show Bloodline, a show that essentially everyone has forgotten. But that role and that award in 2015 turned him into someone who like he's already in his mid late 40s at this point, not necessarily into a star, but like kind of as a like kind of like a prestige actor at this point, like a very well respected, like, oh, like if like we know Ben's gonna deliver, So like hot on the heels of that Emmy win, he's given like kind of like the biggest platform we'll say he's ever been granted in a feature film. Like, he's about to have the most eyes on him than ever before in like his career, right? And like, yeah, I just forgot how awesome he can be when he's allowed to just properly cook, like he has so much fun. Again, like he's been like there's like Ready Player One, I think maybe like Robin Hood. Like he's been in some like movies since then.
Yeah.
But he was a delight in this movie. Like I was so happy every time he was on screen.
To pay compliments to how good he is, I'm not even sure how many Tony lines he actually got in this film. I actually think he got some of like the more cheeks ones, and he makes it like he elevates it to a level where it might as well have been a Tony line because it's not just like the performance.
He's
is
definitely the
good.
best performance in the movie. Like,
yes,
I think by a
pretty
good
wide
margin.
Yeah.
Well said. And I think number two, I mean, maybe it's Donnie Yen for Churret, but Diego Luna does kind of cook in this.
It's either Diego or Donnie.
It's impossible to watch this without the
we're
benefit
giving
of
him
Andor.
so much. We're giving him so much Andor credit.
We're giving the Andor credit because that does supplement that. Yeah.
But he cooks in this movie. Like, let's not kid ourselves.
For what's worth, it's like the interiority he's carrying. It feels as if like Andor did come out before this. I will give him that benefit.
That's what I'll say.
Like,
yes, that's true. That's true. I'm not like, you're not just reading into it because of Andor. You're reading into it because he looks like he's carrying all the stuff that happened in Andor on his face all the time.
Absolutely.
Calculated performance.
It's not just a like, everything's a nail because we're searching with a hammer way, because we're searching with the Andor hammer. It's like no, like he genuinely does have so much like dramatic heft and like gravitas just like in that character that's only amplified.
And that's credit to Andor as well, because like then you have moments where, like, for example, when K2SO tells him climb, and it's like calling back to that moment in Andor, which is, by the way, like so amazing. Like you see him being like moved by that emotionally, and it's like, okay, so clearly like Tony saw the way that he reacted to that and was like, yeah, we can make a whole 3-episode arc about the time that K2SO told him to climb, right? Like,
no, absolutely. It felt like seeing an old friend when Diego was on screen. I was like, that's my guy right there. Like that's we've been through it with him.
Literally, when we go to the rings of Catherine, I mean, coolest place ever. Also, maybe reshoot location.
Well, I think 100% methinks that is.
That feels like the most like Tony scene in the entire movie is the Cassian Andor introduction.
1,000,000,000%. And also because they're in like they're standing in like a small square the entire time, that kind of does give reshoot. But like, and maybe the other exterior shots weren't, but like they're in that interaction that like when he ultimately shoots the rebel because like he can't get away, like, oh, that's pure Tony. That is pure Tony.
But tell me you didn't like feel something when like he's like sifting his way through the crowd, someone bumps into him, he like briefly looks at the screen for like the face reveal, and you're just like, there he is.
No. I mean, I wrote this in my notes. That. I snapped my finger, pointed at the screen. Cassian, let's go! I was so excited to see him back.
It still hits that opening scene, like where he shoots the guy.
Yeah,
I don't know.
No, it's great. It's great. And again, when with the benefit of Andor hindsight, it's like sometimes I was kind of critical of that scene, I think, in my earlier watches of this, because like it kind of felt a little bit like, oh, they're just making his character like dark and edgy for no reason.
Yeah.
and like the rest of the movie doesn't really support this. But again, like what Andor has done, I guess, is given me a better imagination to like think about what that character might be.
Yeah.
And
Well
then
said.
like I can kind of, even if it's not, I'm not filling the gaps in with concrete information. I'm definitely filling gaps of that character's backstory in my head as I watch the movie.